You're listening to the Fooled by the Root podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is your host, Heidi Marvel. I am so happy to have Sandra Moon on the podcast tonight. Well, it's tonight for me, Sandra. Where are you? Tell us where you are.
So I'm in Australia. I'm in regional New South Wales in a little village quite close to Byron Bay. Most people know Byron Bay, which is the most east coast part of Australia. So beautiful beachside area, and it's 2:20 in the afternoon.
Okay, well, we're joining you from both sides of the world. So, Sandra, I'm just so happy you're here, and I'd love to read the bio that you sent to everyone so we can learn a little bit more about you before we dive into questions. Sandra is a Maltese adopted person from regional NSW in Australia. She is a journalist and a writer and is writing a memoir on her experience of adoption and reunion with the universal themes of the innate desire for family, connection, and belonging. She was in a children's home and therefore classified as a forgotten Australian. And Sandra is also the child of a forgotten Australian who was in foster care placements in children's homes. She is a mother and has had several experiences of motherhood, most of them non-traditional. She has been a legal guardian of a child in Nepal. Sandra has fostered 3 children and has 1 daughter she birthed. Currently, her family consists of herself, a teen, a tween, and a cat called Gretel. I love that, Sandra. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Heidi. It's an absolute pleasure. I'm thrilled.
Oh, it's been so nice to get to know you, Sandra, and you're so brave to be able to tell your story in this public way. And I just want to say thank you in advance for that, because I know it's not an easy thing to do, but it's a very powerful thing to do. So I would just like to open up my heart and my arms to you and all of our listeners. We're all here for you, and we would just love for you to start wherever you like.
Okay, so I guess my story starts with my first mother's story. And I won't tell a lot of that because that's her story and I'm very respectful of that. But she was in foster care and got pregnant with me. My father, I learnt this later on, had just arrived from Malta and they became pregnant. They weren't together. So it was part of a time in Australia with the forced adoption practices where single women often, even if they had partners, they were still coerced and forced and sometimes drugged into relinquishing their children into adoption. So I found out probably not that long ago, probably 10 years ago, that I was not adopted straight away, that I went into a children's home, St Anthony's Children's Home, for the first 3 weeks of life. And then I was adopted by, very loving adopted parents, and they have a biological daughter of their own, and I have an older brother who's also adopted. And wouldn't it be nice if the fairy tale was real and that was, and life just was great. But as adopted people know, we do have an innate desire to find out who we are, why we are like we are, to find people that genetically mirror us, that speak like us, talk like us, walk like us, and make us feel that we belong. And, no matter how much love and sense of belonging is created around us, the pain can be in the duality of it's still not quite hitting the mark for us, which can be difficult for the adoptive family, and then also it's difficult for us when we try and reunite. So I did try and reunite, and I think reunion is ongoing. I'm not saying my reunion story is closed, but it has been a really long, difficult reunion. So basically I found out, I found my first mother, and we're very alike, and she's lovely. I do love her, and I've got younger siblings. So in my adopted family, I'm the eldest. I'm the youngest, but in my maternal mother's family, my first mother, I'm the eldest, and the same on the paternal side. So we struggled. It was before we had any forced adoption apologies in Australia. So there was no understanding of forced adoption practices, like a national gaslight has occurred. But when things failed, we kind of unravelled, even though they were very similar, and that happened a few times. And essentially when the forced adoption apology happened at the state levels and by the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, at the time, she also announced some funding for counselling, and I jumped straight on board. I was like, yes, if we're going to make it, the only way we can make it is with support of people who understand, right?
Right.
So, there was a forced adoption support service that was started. I have had an adoption-informed counsellor ever since then for 8 years, and it has been a life changer. Having someone who can hold your story and understands the essential struggles of being an adopted person and the relationships that occur around you because of that has just been absolutely incredible. I can't thank them enough. So I guess that's my story. I don't have contact with any of my biological family. I did find out that my father passed away, my first father. And, again, I contacted that side of the family, and that kind of unravelled as well. So I guess one reason I want to talk about my story is to let people know that it's a really complicated situation, and you may feel it's about you when reunion breaks down, but it's more than likely not, because almost the majority of reunions break down. And there's a lot of complicated reasons for that. And, it's really hard because you feel like you're alone. You feel no one understands. They don't understand why you're still trying to keep this ball rolling in your life that kind of is always falling apart. So I guess I just want to let people know, like, you're not alone, and it's not necessarily you that these things aren't going ahead as you would like. It's you are, and the relationships and the dynamics are a result of a vacuum of silence that you were raised in. Your parents were told to raise you as if they're your own. Your first parents were told to go home and forget about it. And you're kind of stuck in the middle trying to figure out what's going on.
Thank you for putting words to that experience, Sandra. Our stories as adopted people have so many similarities, and a lot of us trot into reunion with this huge unicorns and butterflies, and boy, it is a very difficult thing. Even if it has positive aspects to it, it's a very disorienting experience. And thank you for acknowledging that, and also the power of counseling. And I know that the last time we talked, and I think it would be really important to think about this a little bit more and have you speak about this a little more, the intergenerational trauma. Like, you are the daughter of a lost Australia. Like, wow. So that the thread goes on through the intergenerational trauma. What can you tell us about that? Because you have stated that your mothering is so diverse and dynamic, and probably your awareness of that intergenerational trauma has been very pivotal in helping you mother better.
Yes, I think so. So forgotten Australians are children who are placed into state care. So there was a report that came out on Australians who experienced institutional or out-of-home care as children, and they are called forgotten Australians, which refers to people who were in institutional and foster care in the 20th century. And it's estimated that there's more than 500,000 Australians have experienced life in an orphanage home or other forms of out-of-home care. Wow. So that report acknowledged that forgotten Australians are more likely to be on lower incomes, have chronic physical and mental health conditions, experience convictions and homelessness. They face daily challenges as a consequence of separation from parents. So I guess I understand the deep and lasting effects of separation and the feeling of abandonment. I understand from myself the disconnect, the desire for belonging, and I guess it allows me to understand at a deep empathic level that no matter what amount of love we give, it might not be received in the way we want, but that love still needs to be given. And having the bonds of attachment broken has a devastating and lasting impact on us. And having looked at some epigenetics and intergenerational trauma, I know for myself I struggle with relationships, I struggle with connections that I feel are deep, that people actually get me. And part of that is you don't always want to reveal yourself because you fear abandonment, you fear rejection. I think fearing rejection is a big one for me. I've been a serial breaker-upper in relationships, but how that affects my mothering is I just love as much as I can and accept as much as I can, try and be open and as honest as much as I can. But it probably makes me also a little bit, like my biological daughter is the only thing in my life that is physically connected to me. So I'm so protective of her. And, that deep bond and deep connection is only with her. And the way I parent with her is the same as the way I parent with the other children I have and have had in my life. It's just a deep love. And with the foster children, it's, totally accepting them as my children and accepting that they've got the same issues. And it's really helped with the teen that I have because I can speak to her on a deep level about these things, and we understand each other because we've experienced similar things. I'm certainly not saying I've spent lots of time in foster care. I didn't. I was in a home for like 3 weeks, but the changes to my neural pathways, are similar to the changes and the breaks in neural pathways of children in foster care. So in a lot of ways, I get it.
I do think it affects how we parent and how we show up in relationships. And
yes,
it's interesting how we desire so much connection, but a lot of times we're the first ones to push back and withdraw from that connection. It just doesn't feel safe in most instances,
Yeah, and I guess because, those first tears you have as a child, you're not satisfied. You're away from your mother, you're crying for your mother, you're crying for breast milk, and you learn that when you're upset and you want what is a universal right as a child to have your parent there, the most important person supposedly in our lives, you're not going to get it.
It's a hard thing to wrap wrap your mind around. One of the other notes that I took is, reclaiming the loss. We talked about that. Like, how do we reclaim our lives? Obviously, therapy is a huge way to do that. But as one writer to another, Sandra, I'm sure that your writing has been a way to touch base with the real person inside of you. Can you tell me more about how your writing came about and what it means to you, and a little bit more about the book that you're writing and how it's helping you?
Sure. Can I go back to the last point? Oh, that is a great. Can I just talk a little bit more about how
Please.
the intergenerational trauma did? Okay. So I think a big influence on me was the fact that my first mother's experience in care wasn't great. And I decided a long time after thinking that I didn't want any children at all in my 30s that I did, and I wanted to foster. So after having my own daughter, and then I faced some infertility issues myself, I began the process earlier than I expected. And I joined a foster care agency in their permanency support program, which is always to keep the family preservation if possible and supports the child to go into extended family care.
Yeah, that's the way that it should be, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I vote for that.
Yes. I think one thing that puts people off fostering is they think the baby might, or the child might, go back to the family. And yes, that's true. And actually, that's what you want to happen, because you want them to have the family connection. And studies have shown that even if the parenting is considered just good enough, the fact that they are with their family, they're going to have so much better outcomes. So that's kind of an interesting fact, I think.
It is an interesting fact and something definitely to think about. Is there any other thoughts on the intergenerational trauma, Sandra, before we talk about writing?
I am working solidly, constantly on myself to bust the myths that I have been born with, or not born with, that I have been raised with about adoption and about, the adopted person, that all of those things that can make you struggle because they're not true. You're not lucky, you weren't chosen, you're not special. All of those things that the dominant narrative says, I'm constantly working with the reality of what happened. You weren't chosen, you were just the first baby, coming around the conveyor belt, and the phone call was made. You weren't lucky. Nobody's lucky to lose their family and expected to be grateful for that. So I guess it's actively working against all those myths, and that's what's led me into writing about it as well, because I've felt so isolated and so alone in this experience, and finding other people who are writing about it, and who are even yourself and other people that are in online communities, has just been of such absolute comfort to me. And I think, it's time to bust these myths, and it's time for adopted people's voices to be heard. We're the experts. People need to hear it and listen to us. So I want to add to that. I want to add my story. And if that helps other people go, I can do this. It does feel terrible. It does feel isolating. It's really lonely. And it's shit.
Mm-hmm.
It's my life. I can make it how I want. And get some help if possible, because people do understand, even though you might not have found them yet. There are people who do understand.
Yeah, it's everything. It's everything, because we can heal in community, we can grieve in community, we can celebrate, and we can share, and we can listen. And I think the written word is so powerful, Sandra. And we talked about you sharing some of your writing. I don't know if you feel like doing that, or if you'd like to talk to us a little bit more about your book, but I love being read too. You're like, I'm not here to read you a bedtime story.
I'll just find a piece. So this is just a 500-word piece. It is part of what I'm working with in my memoir. So this is called A Better Life. I'm 16 in the kitchen at home in a small regional town in New South Wales. My father is watching the Mardi Gras parade on the news. I rush into the lounge room and stand watching the march as my heart beats loudly. It's the first time I've seen it. I love the music, the rainbow flags, the dykes on bikes. The story finishes, but I know the queer community excites me. They should all be put on an island, my father says, smirking. I turn to face him. That's so mean, I say, raising my voice and glaring at him. There's nothing wrong with them. I rush back through the kitchen towards the stairs to my room. What's wrong? Dad calls out. I was only joking. Mum looks up at me from the sink. What's the matter? Halfway up the stairs, I turn to her. Through blurry vision, I shout, I could be one of them. The laughter bursts out of her mouth like it is the most absurd thing she's ever heard. No, you're not. My face stings hot and red. I turn, stomp to my room and slam the door. Many years later, my parents visit me in my share house in Brisbane. At the time, I host a women's community radio show. In my bedroom, there's a photo in the studio of my co-host sitting on my knee and both of us dressed as fairies. It sits alongside a queer calendar pulled out of a street mag and posted on the wall. Out of earshot of my dad, my mum whispers, I know you're different. I saw the poster in your room. I don't respond. I'm unable to talk about it, so used to stymieing my feelings, covering things over and sweeping things under the carpet. There are no words. Am I still different? The only relationship I'd had with a chap from school I dated for 5 years. We moved to Brisbane together and I left him when he had a gay affair. Back in high school, he used to buy gay mags and read the classifieds. I used to read the magazine Lesbians on the Loose, but was never brave enough to buy them in case my parents, who were Pentecostal Christians, found them. Was I or wasn't I? And if yes, what exactly was I, lesbian or bi? I'm now 49. To date, that has been my longest relationship ever. I wonder what my life would look like if I hadn't been lucky. So lucky that when I was born in the 70s to a single mother and a Maltese father, I was taken by the Catholic Adoption Agency for a so-called better life, to be gifted to a married couple with English and Irish sensibilities. We went to church every Sunday and I attended Catholic primary and secondary school, where I learnt my nature was a sin.
Wow, that was really, really good. And that definitely leads me to the next point that we talked about, just coming into our own identities and our own sexuality and who we are. And that's just one more layer of shame for so many people. And the fact that you were able to articulate it so beautifully. Whatever happened with your parents? Did they ever accept you for all of who you are? I just hope there's good news. Oh, good.
Yes, they do. They do. But it's still difficult because part of the loss, I think, with adopted people is not only the loss of your family and then there's the loss of your adopted family's child that they were hoping to have. It's the grief and the loss of who you would have become. And I really feel like I'm only becoming who I am now. I mean, people would say different. They'd probably think, oh, well, you've always been strong and blah, blah, blah. But I only now feel that I'm able to start connecting, not particularly about my sexuality, but that's part of it in who I'm meant to be, who I would have been if I had been allowed to grow up amongst people who are creatives. I'm a creative and people who are politically minded. So my first father was very politically minded, and my maternal side is very creative. So I think it is a double whammy if you're part of the queer community or identify as LGBTIQ plus, that, you know, the majority of these adoptions, especially, I can only speak for, I guess, Australia. I know the UK and New Zealand were similar. I'm not sure about America, is through religious organisations. And what do we learn as someone growing up in a religious organisation? It's that, you know, you can't lay with another man. That was the thing that was taught in church. And the priests were.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. That is like the understatement of the year. Yeah. It's so corrupt and so disturbing. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. Well, I'm so glad that you could speak your truth in that way, Sandra. And as we begin to shape the last part of the interview, I know that it was really important to you and is really important to you to speak to adopted people. And I know you said you wrote something. You can read that or whatever you would like to do. And I want to make sure you have space, truly speak about anything that we didn't talk about that would be important for you.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you. So I'm writing this to other adopted persons, especially those feeling very alone and isolated in their lived experience. It is not just you. I'm also writing to myself. This is a letter to me, the little child in the children's home for 3 weeks, then the little girl mulling over P.D. Eastman's book, Are You My Mother? The little girl teased and ridiculed, the teenager humiliated by others, the lover who rejects all her partners, the mother who fears losing her children. Each day you are stronger. The tears come and they go. The sadness, the disappointment also come and go. And as you get older, the understanding of the injustice grows. I do feel trafficked and I do feel a commodity, and maybe you do too. We share loss and some of us share more. The longing for our first families, a longing for connection, a sense of dislocation, of never fitting in how much we try, of people pleasing, of not raising our adoption in case we hurt our parents, of having to live with the duality of longing for our first families and the difficulties of being raised as if we were their own, even though we weren't. Mostly we were the backup plan, and any deviation from the plan is unappreciated. We don't have what others have for granted and take for granted, a true birth certificate, important and sometimes life-saving medical history, connection to our first family, mother, father, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, and grandparents, connection to our ancestry and lineage, genetic mirroring and the foundations that it gives one in time and place, a right to our inheritance, even if it is only to family stories. None of that's there. It's all gone. And yet we are made to feel as though we should be grateful. To say otherwise is considered hurtful. And haven't we been given everything? But ultimately, it is us living with hurt every day of our lives, worse on birthdays, holidays, and events. We have a unique space in this world, but it's not enviable. We're 4 times more likely to die by suicide than non-adopted persons. We have worse health outcomes, worse mental health outcomes. There's also an expectation deficit and othering. Reunion's not all rosy. We endure a world where we are largely silenced and others have largely written the adoption narrative, that of being saved, being chosen, and being lucky. And I disagree with these. They're falsehoods. Neat fairy tales to fit in with the fertility industry and the adoption agencies who stole babies from single women and young unmarried girls. But to you, I say the sun still rises and it still sets and days still have blue skies. Take the steps you can to stay on track and make this life triumphant. To reclaim one's life and speak your truths are powerful. Get as many documents gathered about your adoption. That is powerful. Make space to absorb them. That is necessary. Find an adoption-informed and trauma-informed counsellor who is life-changing and worth every cent or hour you require. Picking your battles is crucial. Not everyone will understand, and that's to be expected as they have grown up with the fairy tales too. But not everyone will matter. You will learn who your allies are, reclaim your space in whatever way you can, make your own circles of safe, compassionate people who will walk with you on your travels. Get your first birth certificate if possible, your hospital records, records from the children's home. Find family, change your name, annul the adoption, speak about these things, and find communities, even if only online. Do what you can manage. And if a reunion fails, as much as it hurts terribly, know that it isn't you, but this goddamn situation inflicted upon you that you never chose. And it was also inflicted upon your first family too. And they didn't choose it either. So plant your feet on the ground. Grow tree roots for yourself and your family's present and future, because you are pretty amazing. You survived and you triumphed. And if you disagree, say it without hesitation.
That is it just acknowledges the pain and the loss. And we're doing this thing. We're learning how to empower ourselves, and it's amazing. I can't thank you enough, Sandra, for the bravery, for sharing your story and your heart and your writing, and for taking the time to write to our beautiful audience. You are just, from my heart to yours, I'm so appreciative to you. Are there any other things you want to say before we go get ice cream?
No, I just want to say I'm appreciative to you, and I'm appreciative to all the other voices out there. And yeah, I really feel that the community, I'm just becoming aware of voices out there, and I really feel it's an amazing community, and I really encourage people to do what they can when they can and give themselves the space and time to heal.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully said. Thank you, Sandra.
Oh, thank you so much.